This is part 3 of the Chapter 8 lecture notes. Um, we're moving on to the Calvin cycle. We covered the light-dependent reactions, or you could just say the light reactions. What you're seeing here, this illustration is basically an illustration of a chloroplast in cross-section. So this is the double membrane of your chloroplast, and or the phospholipid bilayer of your chloroplast. And then this is a thylakoid, and that's where the light reactions occurred, and we generated NADPH and ATP during the light reactions. So now carbon dioxide is going to be used. We used our water. Water was one of our reactants in photosynthesis, and that was used in the light-dependent reactions. The Calvin cycle is going to use carbon dioxide from the air, which is going to enter the stomata of a leaf, and the ATP and the NADPH are going to be used to convert that carbon dioxide first to a molecule called 3-PGA, and then to a molecule called G3P. And G3P is a sugar that has 3 carbons. So what has to happen in the Calvin cycle is the Calvin cycle has to turn, or it has to occur 6 times. It has to occur 6 times. If you remember in the overall equation, it starts with 6 CO2 molecules. So you have to have 6 turns of the Calvin cycle, or 6 cycles, before any of this G3P 3-carbon molecule can be used for actual food, because the first 5 are used to regenerate a 5-carbon molecule called RUBP. So basically what happens in the Calvin cycle is carbon dioxide combines with RUBP and forms this intermediate molecule that has 6 carbons. And that immediately splits into 3-PGA, which contains 3 carbons. And then that is converted into G3P. And the G3P, glucose 3-phosphate, is the actual molecule that's used to produce either glucose or fructose or whatever sugar that the plant is producing. But again, the first 5 G3Ps are used to generate RUBP, because you have to keep making RUBP for the Calvin cycle to continue. So for every 6, the first 5 are used to generate RUBP, and then the 6th one can be used to generate glucose. So the light independent reactions, or the Calvin cycle, just means that they don't need light, but they can occur in light. The first stage is called carbon fixation, and this is the stage where the carbon dioxide is added to this molecule called RUBP. All you really need to know about RUBP is is that RUBP has 5 carbons. RUBP is a 5-carbon molecule. And the enzyme that catalyzes this reaction is called Rubisco. And if you were to count all the enzymes on the earth, if you were just to count all the different enzymes that are used in animal cells, plant cells, bacterial cells, Rubisco by far would be the enzyme that you would find in the highest percentage. This is the most common, it's the enzyme that we have in the most abundance on the earth. And you can see why, because it's needed in photosynthesis, and none of us on this earth could live without photosynthesis, because that's where our oxygen comes from. So this enzyme may not sound like much to you, but Rubisco is one of the most important enzymes in the world. So what's generated after carbon dioxide combines with RUBP, catalyzed by Rubisco, is a 6-carbon molecule that immediately breaks up into 2 3-carbon molecules called 3-PGA. So that was step 1 and the stage 1. And stage 2 is the reduction stage, and that is when ATP and NADPH make the G3P molecule. Here they call it GA3P. I don't know why one slide says G3P and the other says GA3P. I have no idea, but it's glucose 3-phosphate, and 2 of those are needed to make 1 molecule of glucose. 2 G3Ps or GA3Ps are needed to make 1 molecule of glucose. And the regeneration of RUBP is the 3rd stage, and that, like I told you, those G3P or GA3P molecules, 5 of those must be used to regenerate RUBP. And this makes it much easier to see and to explain. Okay, so you've got 3 molecules of carbon dioxide that come into this Calvin cycle, and they combine with 3 molecules of RUBP. So you end up with, since they're going to form 3 molecules of a 6-carbon compound that immediately splits up, then that will end up being twice the number of 3-carbon molecules. So if they were going to make 3 molecules of this 6-carbon compound, which is what would happen if 3 molecules of CO2 combined with 3 molecules of RUBP. CO2 has 1 carbon, RUBP has 5 carbons. So they would make 3 molecules of a 6-carbon compound. The problem is that it immediately splits up. So you end up with 6 molecules of 3-PGA. So again, I got interrupted, I'm sorry, but again, the point we're at now is that 6 molecules of 3-PGA have been produced, and 3-PGA is a 3-carbon molecule. Okay? And that was carbon fixation. Carbon dioxide is attached to RUBP or combined with RUBP, so that's called carbon fixation. And that is catalyzed by the enzyme Rubisco. And then the reduction of 3-PGA occurs from the use of ATP and NADPH. And when the 3-PGA is reduced, it produces 6 molecules of GA3P or G3P, depending on which slide you look at. So 5 of those molecules are needed to regenerate 3 molecules of RUBP. And just in case you're not making the connection, I'll tell you why. GA3P has 3 carbons. So 1 of those molecules has 3 carbons. So 5 GA3Ps have 15 carbons. Okay, so this equals 15 carbons here. 15 carbon atoms. Well, each RUBP has 5 carbon atoms. So to get those 15, to make an even number of not an even number, I don't mean it like that, but to make the smallest number of RUBP molecules that can be made is 3, because they have to be made in groups of 5 carbons each. You see what I mean? So the 5 molecules of G3P that have 3 carbons each, total they have 15 carbons. And those 15 carbons are needed to make 3 molecules of RUBP, since they have 5 carbons each. So that is the reason for all of this complication. So you have to have, for 1 turn of the cycle, you end up with 6 GA3Ps. 5 of those are used to make RUBP, and 1 of those is used to make half a glucose. So you have to have 2 turns of the Calvin cycle to make a whole glucose molecule. Because 1 turn will only give you 1 Ga3P that can be used to make glucose. So it would take 2 turns to give you 2 molecules of Ga3P that could be used to make 1 glucose. And that is because Ga3P only has 3 carbons. All right, Rubisco, the name is actually ribulose biphosphate carboxylase oxygenase. So we will call it Rubisco. It can function as a carboxylase in the Calvin cycle or an oxygenase, which carries out a reaction called photorespiration, which is like a wasteful reaction. It doesn't result in the production of sugar. Some plants have evolved mechanisms to reduce photorespiration because, like I say, Rubisco can catalyze, it can work as an oxygenase, which doesn't produce sugar, or it can work as a carboxylase, which does produce sugar. And if it's just an oxygenase, it doesn't really help the plant at all. It doesn't make food at all. So it's a wasteful reaction. Now, this is slide number 23, so you can watch this. I would recommend that you watch this, the whole entire process, and I guess that was it. So the only thing I want to say is that there are plants that have evolved certain ways to maximize photosynthesis so that they have less photorespiration. Some of the plants, what they do is they carry out photosynthesis at different times of day. They close their stomata at night so that for one thing, it's for 2 purposes. A cactus is living in a dry region, in a desert region, so it's very dry and it needs to conserve water. So it keeps its, and I just said that wrong. They keep their stomata closed during the day. So by keeping their stomata closed during the day, they minimize water loss, but they also can't carry out the Calvin cycle. They have to carry out the Calvin cycle at night because if their stomata are closed, they can't take in carbon dioxide. So some plants like the cactus just carry out their Calvin cycle at night. And there are other plants that carry out the Calvin cycle and the light reactions in different areas of the leaf. And that also can help minimize photorespiration. There's not a whole lot in these slides about it, so I'm just going to end there, but they have different names. CAM, some of those plants are called CAM plants, and some are called C4. The plants that have not adapted to minimize photorespiration are called C3. So they do carry out photorespiration and as well as photosynthesis kind of equally, but the photorespiration doesn't really do anything for them. It's a wasteful reaction, but they're able to survive anyway. But the CAM plants and the C4 plants have evolved so they kind of minimize photorespiration. They keep that from happening. That's the